Right, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to cover quite a bit of ground looking at the Western Hemisphere, essentially the Americas, and getting through uh, the copious developments that took place during the 18th, excuse me, the 19th century to get us up to the year 1900 and the dawn, really, of the 20th century. So what this includes is, with regard to Central and South America, tracing really the decline of the Spanish colonial influence and the rise in that vacuum, the rise of numerous independent states, and the issues that affected a series of independence movements all across Southern and Central America, and also looking at the individuals that are largely credited with leading those movements, including Simon Bolivar. Moving northward, we'll continue to discuss developments in the United States, particularly in westward expansion, with the key turning points or advents of the Louisiana Purchase in 1804, and this idea of manifest destiny that seemed to grip much of the country, inspiring people to move and settle westward. We'll also take a look at the myriad of political developments ranging from the War of 1812, early on in the 19th century, to the establishment of Jacksonian democracy, the issue of slavery, of course, and the development of minority rights, and also the Civil War itself, mid-century, and the era of Reconstruction. I will touch upon the Gilded Age, but what I'll be doing is posting a PBS American Experience episode dealing with that specific topic, which really I think does a very nice job of covering that era, basically the last quarter century, which takes us to McKinley's election in 1896. To begin with, I want to start with the Haitian Revolution, which really takes place towards the close and the close of the 18th and dawn of the 19th century. It's important to understand that with regard to the French Revolution, I think I mentioned in previous lectures that this was a revolution that would go on to inspire so many others. One of the earliest to kind of exemplify and take up the banner of the concepts involved in the ideology, really, of the French Revolution. Again, focusing on equality, liberty, fraternity, was the Haitian Revolution, and it really kind of sets the stage as far as the fallout, the global kind of fallout from what was happening in France, and so, of course, in 1789, when the French Revolution breaks out, white French settlers in Hispaniola, the island of Hispaniola, uh, because Haiti was a French colony. Uh, the white settlers here on this island in the Caribbean warred with one another. You have large plantation owners versus smaller farmers, individual or independent farmers. They conflicted with one another as far as who or which group was going to represent the colony before the revamped institutions of the French state, and whose interests within this colony were going to win out. Desperate to have their side represented, they resorted to arming their slaves in order to fight for one side or the other. Very quickly, what happens is that these slaves begin to take matters into their own hands and fight for their own freedom and their own interests. They're led by the likes of Toussaint Louverture um, and Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Uh, they are these the Haitian Revolution itself is kind of further compelled by the National Convention in France that is going to on February 5th of 1794 decree freedom for all slaves within you know French holdings essentially throughout the French state. Toussaint here is going to be elected or seize power, become dictator for a brief period of time. In 1802, Napoleon is going to send an army to try and recapture Haiti. This army was defeated, however. Toussaint was, uh, before that happened, Toussaint was taken back to Paris, and in his absence, and as a result of his being captured, Dessalines is going to establish an independent republic, Haitian Republic or Haitian state. And for the remainder of the 19th century, Haiti was really at the whim of numerous other uh, states and powers. You have the United States to the north, but they also have to deal with Spanish interests scrapping to try and maintain some sort of you know viable presence really in the Western Hemisphere. We'll get into what's happening in Spain briefly as it relates to the Americas. But at this point in time, early in the 19th century, Spain is still trying to exert its influence. With regard to the United States and other European powers, however, there are definite commercial interests at stake and wish to kind of lay claim to Hispaniola and Haiti in particular. And that's going to be the case really with regard to the United States, really from about the Reconstruction era. You're talking about 1867 essentially to 1914, when United States commercial interests begin to really kind of ramp up as far as an interest group that is going to want to begin to exert itself on a global stage, in many respects kind of following the same characteristics, the same kinds of trends that we've traced earlier with regard to the British East India Company and also the Dutch East India Company, where you have these kind of private interests, these commercial interests, driving colonization, settlement, which, and it's all for economic profit. But what happens is that in the process of doing that, in the process of seizing control of ports and resources, that this brings along with it a political element that requires state intervention. And so therefore the same thing is going to happen with regard to the United States early on in the pre-World War One years in the early 20th century. We'll talk briefly about that in the next series of lectures as we move towards World War One. As for developments moving from Central into South America, again, Spanish influence is in the process of a corrosive kind of decline. You have this, and your textbook kind of does a nice job of talking about the different ethnicities that are coming to the forefront of Latin American society, beginning with the Creoles. This is who begin to assert their own agendas to a greater extent. These are, of course, people of Spanish or European ancestry or descent that are born in the Americas. So they have kind of a hold on to a kind of cultural roots that have come from European backgrounds, but they are also at the same time have no real uh, tie officially to those states in Europe. That they really kind of, as far as their own personal or homeland type of identity, they don't have any of that strong, uh, kind of tie to these countries back in Europe. They really kind of are grounded by this point in their land as they know it in the Americas. Again, it's the French Revolution, the Napoleonic era of this early 19th century, in which Spain is going to serve, and the Iberian Peninsula more broadly, is going to serve as the uh, ground zero for clashes between the French army and the Allied forces that were fighting against the French. Now, primarily with regard to the Iberian Peninsula, we're talking about the British, who deploy an army to try and tie down or bog down and occupy uh, men and materials um, from the French army so that they can't be used to run roughshod over the rest of the continent. When that happens, the Spaniards themselves within the Spanish nation begin to ally themselves either with the French or with the British. And so it becomes, in some respects, not only a war between these main rivals, main European powers, but also almost akin to a civil war in some respects between the Spanish people themselves. When that happens, it's in that again a power vacuum within Spain itself where these populations in Spanish-held colonies begin to exert their own independence and follow through on it and establish their own independent states. When this happens, by and large, it is these new uh, states that come online in Central and South America are going to be governed by a series of military governors themselves. So we're talking about the establishment of these juntas, in which the military is really going to serve as um, the law enforcer, the executor, and the executive branch really of maintaining order and maintaining all functions of government. This is in the case in what New Spain, which we refer increasingly here as as Mexico, but also in places like the Southern Cone, which includes the future states of Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. And it's pretty rapid. Just to kind of run down a little bit of a laundry list here. The tide of independence, in its earliest kind of expressions, can be seen in 1811, where Venezuelan independence is gained, uh, due in part to a young lieutenant by the name of Simon Bolivar, who's going to participate in that independence movement. Paraguay is also going to gain its independence in 1811. By 1816, the United Provinces are going to gain their independence, which is going to basically be a collection of various states. We'll talk about that in a moment. In 1818, you have the independence of Chile. This is aided by the efforts of General Jose de San Martin. In 1820, Mexico is going to proclaim its independence, and in 1821, Peru would proclaim its independence. Now, Simon Bolivar is also going to aid in this Peruvian movement. Later, it would be absorbed into what's known as Gran Colombia. This is going to include Colombia itself, what is today Colombia, the country, Venezuela, Ecuador, and also later Panama, what would become Panama in the 20th century. By 1825, you also have Bolivia gaining its independence as well. Now, the two main drivers of what these independence movements meant and how they should be, how they should proceed as far as interacting with one another, comes down to these two individuals, Simon Bolivar on the one hand and San Martin on the other. These two men were rivals. They obviously come from military backgrounds. Bolivar embraced kind of republicanism or Republican ideals. And again, we're talking not about any type of party affiliation. We're talking about philosophy of government. So it's a lowercase r in this context. That government should be representative, should be the institutions of government should act as a republic, in that there should be representatives elected to represent the people's interests. That's what a republic is. Bolivar believed that this should be the case for the entire continent of South America itself. Now, San Martin favored a more kind of conservative or monarchical type of governing system. But he realized very quickly that his ideas were not necessarily popular. So San Martin withdrew and moved to Europe, where he spent the rest of his life. So these countries are they've taken these efforts to proclaim their independence, and now they're beginning to try and govern in their own right and emerge from beneath these centuries of Spanish rule. Soon afterward, however, they're going to begin to war amongst themselves. This is going to frustrate Simon Bolivar's calls for kind of a United States of South America. And that's the reason why today South America is largely comprised of independent countries, rather than having those countries represent extensive states operating within a kind of federated system, and being united under kind of a more centralized structure, governing over the continent itself. For much of the 19th century, these tensions and suspicions were reinforced by anti-democratic governance in many cases. Now, again, your textbook does a very good job of exploring this and discussing it, starting with the caudillo politics that were practiced, where you have this authoritarian type of rule, and this almost repeated abuse of and abandonment of constitutional practices. Combined with that, you also have this import substitution industrialization, where trade and technology is largely still in the hands of Europeans, and also beginning to develop in North America, but by and large, the centers of trade and the technological aspects of industrialization are staunchly protected and coveted. And so these foreign investors, these foreign powers, are going to begin to play these South American states off against one another. And this is going to contribute to this heightened sense of suspicion and competition between them, and hostilities in some cases between them as well, which is going to undercut Simon Bolivar's kind of grander vision. With regard to Mexico and its independence, and also kind of its setbacks, the political turbulence that was beginning to take place there was preceded by a decade of unrest. Um, Eventually, there's going to be the establishment of a constitutional empire in 1821, about 10 years after it proclaimed its independence. This is going to quickly, however, give way to a constitutional republic in 1824. The first major figure to kind of emerge and really kind of leave his mark in Mexico is that of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He's going to govern from 1833 to 1836, and then again from 1839 to 1845. And he's going to serve as a kind of a caudillo type of figure, this kind of strongman type of governor, you might say, or head of state. He again is a military figure, so he's kind of this has this kind of typical, very characteristic of the what we described here as far as the tendency for these kind of strong charismatic leaders to come to power and act as all the servicer of all functions of state and government. Throughout the early 19th century, there would be border conflicts with Amerindians, specifically the Comanche, which really served to not necessarily directly threaten Santa Anna and his, and the Mexican state, but constantly serve as really a nuisance to Mexico itself. From the 1820s, the Mexican government is going to encourage white settlers from the United States to settle within these northern areas, and this is in part to try and pacify the region. That if they could get settlement there, settlement that was more in line with the ideas of governing as far as the Mexican government was concerned, instead of kind of more tribal or nomadic aspects of the Amerindians, then this would help bolster and shore up, you might say, Mexican claims in the area. This, after about after about a decade or decade and a half, this began to backfire. White settlers began to look to break free from Mexico. They didn't care for practicing Catholicism, as was the case. Catholicism was the Mexican state religion. Most of these white settlers coming from the United States were practicing Protestants. Also, these white settlers retained their identities as Americans, as Americans from the United States. So they looked fondly upon their kind of homeland, which was essentially the other side of just not even the other side of the Mississippi. I mean, it was basically next door, just a border that was very close by. So they had regular contact with family, commercial contacts, what have you, within the United States. These Texan settlers, as they became known, won their independence from Mexico. After an initial defeat at the Alamo, the Texans managed to defeat the Mexican army that was commanded in the field by Santa Anna himself. And Santa Anna was taken captive during that defeat, and as a result, to earn his freedom, he was forced to capitulate and have these Texans establish their own independent republic. Republic of Texas. By 1845, however, and that happens in 1836 to 1845, this Lone Star Republic, as it's often referred to, was really an independent country. The United States, they appealed to the United States for annexation, but with the politics that were happening in the United States, that was not really a possibility in the 1830s. However, by 1845, the Lone Star Republic becomes the state of Texas, as the state in the United States. The following year, in 1846, you have the Mexican-American War erupting. This is over a disputed border between this region, between basically what was or what is the Nueces River, which was the official kind of recognized boundary at the time between the United States and their newly annexed Texas and Mexico. What was happening is that settlers, white settlers, in this case Americans, were beginning to cross over the Nueces River. The United States military was beginning to patrol south of the Nueces River in this territory between the Nueces and the Rio Grande River. And so with that breach of territoriality and recognized borders, the Americans and the Mexican government went to war. Lasted just 2 years, 1846 to 1848, and it led to the United States Army marching south to Mexico City itself, seizing the capital, and presenting basically the terms of peace in what's known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. This is where Mexico ceded territory. Your map in your textbook on page 561 shows a really nice series of annexations and purchases that round out to kind of the southern and southwestern borders of the United States as we know them today. The Mexican government was compensated for this, about a $15 million price tag for this expansive, massive amount of territory that basically stretched all the way to across the Southwest and into the Pacific. The Rio Grande, as a result of this treaty, was also set as the recognized international border between the United States and Mexico. After this collapse during the Mexican-American War, there's going to be a period of unrest internally within Mexico. The next key figure to really kind of emerge is Benito Juarez. He comes to power just rather briefly from 1861 to 1864. He was of Amerindian lineage, and he followed really as I mentioned, in the wake of this power struggle after Santa Anna's downfall. Juarez realized that there was no way for the Mexican state to maintain its finances, and it defaulted on its debt. When that happened, international powers began to seize assets within the Mexican state in order to basically compensate for their loss as far as the defaulting of debt. With Juarez coming to power, it really kind of demonstrates also a social, economic, and political characteristics that were again pretty common. I alluded to this earlier, where you have this authoritarian expression of government in Mexico and elsewhere in throughout the South American continent, where it's kind of this Jekyll and Hyde type of scenario, where you have popular support for a constitutional republic, but the reality is one where strong arm politics, authoritarianism wins out. That there may be a constitution in place, but it is not necessarily practiced or observed, and casually kind of abrogated repeatedly. So this doesn't lead to the best political situations or even decision making at times. As far as economics is concerned, this is going to in many ways reflect the political dynamics, in that you're going to heighten, it's going to feed into kind of classist friction, where industrialists benefiting from centralized authority are going to focus on exporting and consolidating their export of what this portion of the world was best at accommodating, and that includes rubber, sugar, coffee, mined minerals, agricultural goods primarily. And so, in order to consolidate their wealth, their power, expand their holdings, industrial interests, commercial interests within Central and Latin America are going to want to, would throw their weight and their support behind these autocratic rulers that could enforce law and order. The smaller independent farmers, laborers within these various Central and South American states are going to opt for kind of more constitutional modes, representative forms of government. So there's also an urban versus rural dynamic here as well. Usually it's the urban industrialists being pitted against the rural farmers in many cases. And so class tension here is going to be on the rise. It's going to feed political discontent, often expressed in the form of insurrections. So these political, economic, and social trends, this triad essentially, is going to plague Central and South American states well into the 20th century. What's interesting also to note here is that this is also characteristic of trends elsewhere around the world, especially during the 19th century. You're going to see that in places like Russia. Looking at Lucy Worldly's part 3 of her documentary on Tsarist Russia, which I'll be providing on our site. You're also going to see clear cases of this with the advent of Marxist thinking in the mid 19th century in the heart of Europe itself. Karl Marx is German, and he, with the revolutions of 1848, which we'll discuss in the next lecture, it's a repeat of what we just covered here, talking about this political, economic, social tension in the Americas. So, in many cases, the world is experiencing a common type of conflict. They share strong characteristics, but they're not necessarily directly related. The common thread here is industrialization. So that in itself is kind of a key aspect to keep in mind. This kind of long-term consequence, really, of these industrial endeavors that are taking place. Let me pause here and then come back with part 2 and talk about developments in the 19th century United States, and that'll round out this lecture. So stay tuned.